Okay, so hi, and thanks for joining us for today's webinar, Working Well with People with Intellectual and Learning Disabilities. My name is Kath, and I'm one of the Sector Sustainability Coordinators at Community Legal Centres Queensland. I'd firstly like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the land on which we are holding today's webinar in Meanjin, Brisbane. Then they are the Turrbal and Yagara people. I wish to pay respect to their elders past and present and acknowledge that these are stolen lands and that sovereignty was never ceded. As this webinar is being viewed by people across Queensland and Australia, I also pay respect to the traditional owners throughout the country and extend a warm welcome to any First Nations people listening today. So today we are very pleased to welcome Kristy Hill, Abby Zing and Jackie Parsons from WWILD, who will be talking to us about working with people with intellectual and learning disabilities, including how to identify intellectual disabilities, ways to adjust your communication, challenging stereotypes, and improving your service accessibility. I'll let Abby tell you a bit more about what they'll be going over today, but before I do that, I just want to do some quick housekeeping. So today's webinar is being recorded, and we'll have the recording available to download next week. The PowerPoints have been emailed out to everyone who registered and are available to download from our website, as well as from the handout section of the GoToWebinar control panel. We encourage you to ask questions, so simply type your question into the question box on the control panel, and we'll read your questions out when we get to the end of the session, but please feel free to send them through as you think of them. But Kristy, Abby and Jackie will also be asking some questions of you today to get some discussion going. So please put your answers in that text box when we get to those points. So I'll now hand over to Abby and I'll talk to you again at the end of our session.
Thank you, Kath. Welcome everyone to today's session. Very glad to be here. I would like to begin with our acknowledgement to the country. We wish to acknowledge the traditional owners of the land and waters on which we are here today, the Yagara and Yagara people. We also like to pay respect to elders past and present. We acknowledge any First Nations colleague present and the important role First Nations people continue to play within our community and in advocacy for changing systems. It always was and always will be Aboriginal land. First of all, I want to do a brief introduction about WWILD, of who we are, what we do, and also how to make referrals to us if there's any clients you have in mind. So at WWILD, we are a non-for-profit organization. We provide individual services, but also statewide information, advice, and referral services. So in our information, advice, and referral service, we can take phone calls statewide in Queensland, and we also can talk over the phone. So it's really easy. If anyone has question or want to have a case discussion, just give us a call. Any workers at WWILD could provide information for you. So this also increase the accessibility for people with intellectual disability and also the family members who wants to refer the person in need. We provide counseling support at WWILD on one-on-one sessions. So this covers Great Brisbane area. We do have counsellors. We're based in Brisbane, but we do have counsellors doing outreach support in Beenleigh and up to Capucha area. In terms of the Victim of Crime program, both Jackie and I, we are the Victim of Crime case manager. So we provide case management and we do outreach in Greater Brisbane area. So we can provide some practical support around paperwork and also linking people with the services they need in their area, as well as supporting people in transport and if it's in need. In terms of our group support, we do have several different groups. So we do social groups, which is our regular women's group that run over the year. We support women with intellectual disability who can come to the group to learn a bit more social skills and extend their social relationships. So basically, they lead the group and tell us what they want to do. We also have short-term therapeutic groups. We got You and Me relationship group, domestic violence program group, and also sex and sexuality education group. So feel free to check on our website if there's anything you find interesting. Lastly, and most importantly, I want to mention that we do a lot of projects, and Kristy here is our peer worker at WWILD, and he's a main role in participating in a lot of the project, like Listen Up and Equal Access and Easy Read resources developing project. So these projects are centering women with lived experience with intellectual disability, and they give advice to different service sectors and workers on how to increase accessibility to their services. So that's about us. And so our referral pathway is really easy. Just usually we take referrals over the phone, and we operate from Monday to Friday, 9 to 5 p.m. Yes. All right. Next, I want to talk about what we will cover today. So we'll talk about what is intellectual disability and how people with lived experience might identify it in their own ways, and how you can tell who has intellectual disability in a way, to help you identify someone might have intellectual disability when you support them, and how to adapt your communication skills so that you can support them through linking with the services they might need, and also how to improve accessibility with different services. At last, we'll show you some helpful resources that is available online, and we'll talk a bit more about that. I'll pass the next part on to Jackie and Kristy.
Hi everyone, Jackie here. Kristy, did you want to introduce yourself as well?
Hi, I'm Kristy. I'm a P worker and I've got disability.
Thanks, Kristy. So first we thought we'd start off with just a little bit of a reflection. So if you can pop your comment in the chat box. So just when you hear the phrase intellectual disability, what's the first thing that comes to mind? I'll just give everyone a couple of minutes to just answer that. You might be a person who has worked with someone with an intellectual disability before. You might be a person who has a person with a disability or an intellectual disability in their social circle, in their family. Or you could be someone who's, maybe never really considered intellectual disability before, or what that might look like. So Jackie, we've got a couple of comments coming through. Thanks so much, everyone. So far saying some difficulty with comprehension, impacts on communication, a broad term, and it depends on a whole range of things, a need to communicate clearly, challenges with understanding, someone who needs assistance with understanding detailed concepts, a need to be mindful of your language. What else? Thank you, everyone. Yeah, a lot of those things, all of those things could be true for a person with an intellectual disability. I think the one that maybe covers it the best is that it looks different for everybody. And would you agree, Kristy?
Yes, everyone's different. You can't tell if they got disability or not, and everyone's got different disability.
Exactly. Yeah, so it's going to look really different, hey? So we kind of wanted people to think about it because there's a lot of myths and stereotypes, attitudes and assumptions within the community about people with intellectual disability. So we're going to kind of have a look at this because this is really important.
it's really important in the way that the community treats people with intellectual disability, which stems from the way that the community and our society think about people with intellectual disability. So there's lots of myths and stereotypes out there that, are disempowering people with intellectual disability. You might have heard, thoughts or people saying things like out there that, people with intellectual disability, they're like children. You might have heard people say that, oh, this person has the mind of a 5-year-old when referring to someone that's, 40 years old. That's language that, we prefer not to use at WWILD because we find that it doesn't really consider that person's lived experience. That person's 40, then they're not a 5-year-old, so it's not really relevant. There's also myths out there that, can devalue or trivialise a person with an intellectual disability's lived experience. So you might have heard ones like a person with an intellectual disability doesn't really understand what happened to them, so they can't really be hurt by that. We might have heard people, heard the community say things like, oh, people with intellectual disability, they're all the same, they all have the same support needs, which, like Kristy said before, isn't true.
Not true.
Yeah, because people are all different. There's also a lot of community attitudes around, violence and vulnerability. So a common one that we see at WWILD is that the belief that no one would take advantage of a person with a disability or an intellectual disability, or that people with intellectual disability are highly supported and protected and they wouldn't experience violence, which unfortunately is untrue. We see at WWILD a lot of the, violence and vulnerability does come from those protective and supportive relationships and services. Yeah. And finally, lots of stereotypes around dismissing or denying a person with an intellectual disability's experience. So you might have heard people say that, oh, people with intellectual disabilities, they make things up, they're prone to lying, they can't tell what's real and what's not real. This is really problematic. It's just dismissing people's experience and their story. It's just not okay. Yeah. Kristy, was there anything else around myths and stereotypes that you think I missed, or things that you can think of?
And plus, most people with disability don't get help.
Yeah.
We never get help. We get pushed away.
So that's kind of a common experience for people, isn't it?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Thanks, Kristy. Did I miss anything else?
No.
Amazing. Thank you. So now we're just going to cover, what is intellectual disability? So now we're just going to talk about how intellectual disability and disability is defined. So you can see on the screen at the moment, there's two models. So first we'll look at the medical model. So the medical model really looks at, in a nutshell, is that people with disability are the problem, and that people with a disability need to be fixed or cured. So to sum up the medical model shortly, it's that the person with a disability, it's their responsibility to make things and their world around them accessible to themselves. So they have to do all of the work to make our world accessible for them. So we've kind of slowly moved over time towards more of a social model, which looks at disability and people with disability as disability is something that's really normal. It's really normal. It can happen to, to anybody, and that the person is not the problem, that the disability is the problem. So we're hoping as things kind of, move further in towards more of a social model and away from that medical model, that people really look at it as the responsibility being on our community and our society and our environment, that's the thing that has to be made more accessible for people with disabilities. And that's something that a lot of our work at WWILD revolves around. It's us making ourselves accessible and understandable for people with a disability. It's not their responsibility to take on all that to make the things that we're doing or they're doing accessible for them. that makes sense if they got mixed around there. But basically the social model is that the disability is the problem and the person is not the problem. So we're now just going to quickly look at the medical definition of disability. Intellectual disability, sorry. So there's kind of two things that make up an intellectual disability. So on one hand, you have intellectual functioning or IQ. Traditionally, intellectual disability was just looked at as IQ. That was the only thing that was taken into consideration. And varying degrees of people's IQ can place them into a different category of intellectual disability, ranging from mild, moving up to moderate, and then severe and profound, depending on that person's IQ level. As the models kind of developed over time around intellectual disability, it's now including adaptive functioning alongside a person's IQ. So that adaptive functioning looks at all the skills and all of the things that people have learned over their lifetime. So conceptual skills, social skills, practical skills that people have learned over that lifetime, and considering that capacity and their skills in that intellectual disability. Because as we know, someone's capacity, isn't static. It can move over time as people learn different things, and people are always learning over their lifetime, which is why it's really important that it's also considered when looking at that person as a whole. Have I missed anything, Kristy, do you think?
No, that one you did.
That's good, yeah. So just having a look at more of those adaptive functioning skills just a little bit closer, it's really important to note that, like Kristy said, everyone with an intellectual learning disability is different. So one person might be really fantastic at lots of different conceptual skills. So they might be really fantastic at reading and writing, and may have a fantastic memory, and they might struggle with those more practical skills. So things around safety or, personal cares, or it might be the opposite. So it is important to know that a person with an intellectual disability isn't going to struggle with all of those things. All these things in all these, domains, it's really going to be different for everyone, isn't it, Kristy?
Yes.
Yeah.
Everything's different for everyone. Like for me, because my disability, I have trouble with reading and spelling, but I still don't let it stop me.
No. Yeah. So you might struggle with reading and spelling.
Yeah,
but on the other hand,
I can do everything else like planning and getting on time and all that.
Exactly. And you're also a really fantastic public speaker, aren't you? Yeah. So just because someone might struggle, with one domain, doesn't mean that they're going to struggle with all of the domains. But these are just some of the things that people within an intellectual disability may struggle with. So it's something to keep in mind. All good to move on, Kristy?
Yeah.
Yeah.
All right. So at this part, we just want to talk a bit about how to identify intellectual disability, and Kristy might help to add on comments on because we talked about everyone's experience is different and everyone experiences different difficulties in different domains. And also because of the associated stigmatization and bias for people with intellectual disability in their daily life. So you might find some people not feeling comfortable revealing their disability to the service or to other people easily.
No.
Yeah, no.
Because everyone's got different disability. Like me, I'm brain damaged when I was a baby.
Yeah.
But everyone's different. And you can't tell with most of them.
Yeah.
And then if you're working with them, like, don't ask them if they got disability. Ask them what they're good at.
Yeah.
Then you work it out from there. Because most people don't feel comfortable if you just ask them and they don't feel comfortable telling you, because we get put down and made fun of so much and they're worried about it.
Yeah, that's a really good insight.
Yeah.
Kristy. Yeah. So like you said that asking some like strength, start with like a good thing.
Yeah. Or
like,
ask them if you don't mind so I can help you more.
Yeah.
Can I ask you a question?
Yes. Yeah. That's a really good point, Kristy. So like Kristy said, that people may have different words to describe their disability. Because for you, Kristy, you mentioned is a brain.
Yeah, mine, I didn't know mine brain damage when I was a baby.
Yeah. So I just want to kind of show people a few of the key indicators that you may observe when you interact with someone with disability. So you may find some people have struggles responding questions or explaining things themselves.
And some people have problems thinking and going places.
Yeah, like planning things out. Yeah.
And of course, we got disability. Yeah, our brains work a little bit slower, but doesn't mean we can't do it.
Definitely. Yeah, it just means your brain's different and work in different ways. Yeah.
We've got something extra special.
Yeah, that's true. So these are some key indicators for like services and workers in this field, and they can look out for. Therefore, they can adjust their communications and also assess the level of needs for that person. Okay, Kristy.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Or when they talk to them, if they don't understand them, ask them to repeat it back to them so they got what they're saying.
Yes, that's a really good strategy when you can check in the understanding. So that's when you may find someone have difficulty to understand.
Because a lot of people say, yes, we do understand when we don't.
Yeah, that's really important to
So it's best by ask them to repeat it back to you.
Definitely. Just to check in around their understanding. Yeah. And like you said, Kristy, some people may find hard to plan things or put things in sequence, and therefore it's difficult for them to follow instructions. And there might be strategies to write it down or, to tell their support person to help them follow it. Yeah, remember.
And also some people with disability, when they tell someone or something happened, they'll tell them in the story way too. So they've got to be patient with that too, because they've got to tell it the way they need to, in the story way, some of them.
Yeah.
Because that's the only way they can say it.
Definitely. That's a great tip, Kristy. So you like you said, Kristy, people will tell their story in their own way. So sometimes, service or workers have to be patient because it can be off the topic a little bit, but that's the whole picture that person.
Yes, we've got to get to know them and trust them first, because the way we got treated, we don't know to trust them.
Yeah, so building that rapport is really important in the beginning. Yes. And like Jackie mentioned before, there's different domains that people may struggle, and especially like a social domain, when we talk about social norms, that's how the society expects people to behave in a certain way in a social situation. But for people with intellectual disability, sometimes they don't, the common sense is not for everyone. Like the assumed shared knowledge is not for everyone. So you may find people have difficulty to follow social norms, so-called, and also have unconventional expressions. So I've worked with a client who, have this nervous laughter when she has some difficulty to express herself. So that's something to look out for. And people may act or present younger or older than their actual age. So back to the point that everyone may express or experience disability in different ways. Yeah. Thank you. There are also other ways to tell whether a person may need additional support, whether they have a disability. Like Kristy said before, there are some questions you could ask, and there are also some social information about that person that could help you to identify that person's level of needs. So you could look at their like social support, whether they receive disability pension. Whether they have attended a special school or a special class at school. They could, so again, back to that myth, like people may think, people with intellectual disability couldn't work or doesn't have capacity, but they may attend a work training program and they could work with some organization. Also, to look at their daily life, whether they have respite or activity group during the day, whether they're engaging with multiple service system or living situation, whether they're in a supported accommodation, and how is their support looks like in their life. Is there anything you want to add on to that, Kristy?
Yeah, well, that's one of the problems too with people with disability not getting a job because they always get pushed away, or if you give them a job, oh no, I want to work at the counter, oh no, you have to work at the back. You can't do it.
Yeah.
And there's a lot of people with disability haven't got a job because they won't give us a fair go.
Yeah, a fair go is very important, especially with proper training and information providing. People can.
Even though we can't do some things in jobs, but even normal people have trouble. Everyone does.
Yeah, we just need different type of support.
Yeah.
Yeah. Thank you, Kristy.
So following on from what Kristy said and what Abby said, so just asking about a person's disability, Kristy mentioned before saying that not asking someone outright if they have a disability, because we know that can be a bit confronting for the person and also potentially a bit for the person asking the question as well. So what Abby just covered, some of those things, you know, you could be asking about could kind of give you the indication that a person might have an intellectual disability. But Kristy, do you think some people might feel comfortable saying outright to a person that they have a disability, do you think?
Well, yes, some people would. Like at first I wasn't comfortable, but now I am. Like if you ask them in the right way, yes, they would. Some people would, because you should be asking them. That way you know who you're working with.
Yeah, definitely. So it kind of comes back to that everyone's different, isn't it?
Yes.
Yeah. And I know a lot of the time in our work at WWILD and a lot of the work that you've done, Kristy, hey, you've said that it's important for the person with the disability the person with the disability to know why you're asking that they might have a disability and how it's going to benefit them to know about their disability. Like, are you going to offer them extra supports? Are you going to offer them different supports or a special type of, you know, interview or, you know, service? And that was really important for people to know. Yeah. Anything else that I've missed, Kristy, about asking around a person's disability?
No, just pretty much just ask them and just let them know you're there to help them. Like, we just want to know so we know what to do to help you.
Exactly. Yeah. So it's really about building that relationship, isn't it, with the person? And then, you know, feeling comfortable and then feeling comfortable with you to kind of ask those questions around their support needs and their disability, and then just explaining why you're asking them and how it's going to benefit them.
Or that I feel comfortable telling you straight away, just give them a bit more time.
Yeah. And then just really important to note just about, you know, the worker, you know, or the person asking around a person's disability, that sometimes that feeling of, you know, that uncomfortable feeling or, you know, that odd feeling that we get asking about a person's disability or support needs can come from that, you know, I guess long community history of ableism, and, you know, going back to that medical model, seeing disability as a bad thing, as a person being a problem rather than just a normal part of everyday life. And it can be important to reflect on that.
And that's the main thing with people with disability. They don't like talking to people on the phone, asking them questions, because we don't know what they're doing on the other end.
Yeah,
that's a good point, actually. Yeah. And we're actually going to move on to talking about different ways that you can adjust your communication with people. But like Kristy just said, like finding other ways, you know, maybe not the phone if you can be a good thing to do, because it can be a bit uncomfortable having those kind of conversations on the phone, can't it? Yeah. So thanks, Kristy. That'll lead us straight into communication. That was perfect. So we like to start talking around communication with a quote from a client who was part of the Listen Up project, which was kind of looking at, you know, myths and stereotypes around people with an intellectual disability. And a client said that we will shut down if people talk to us like a child or if you talk to us like a professor. And every time I think about communication, that one kind of really sticks with me because it just makes sense. I know that if it was me, if a person tried to talk to me like a child or like a university professor, I would really, really struggle. So that one, I think, really sums it up. Do you agree, Kristy?
Yes, we get a lot of people talk to us like a child, and I say to them, if you're going to talk to me like a child, not like an adult, don't bother.
Yeah, agreed. Yeah. So I know Kristy's kind of already mentioned a few of these. I think the one that's most important with our work at WWILD is definitely building that rapport and trust with the person. I found that since starting at WWILD and, being in a client, service role, that building that relationship and trust is really the, that cornerstone, that like foundation of your work with the person. And if you don't have that good and strong, trustful relationship, it can be really hard to work with a person. So other things that we found can be helpful is slowing down your speech and avoiding overcomplicated words and phrases. Like Abby mentioned before, some of those like common sense phrases, like Kristy, one we say a lot is, I want to jump into a meeting, right?
You can't.
Yeah.
You can't jump in.
No, because I'm not jumping into a meeting, am I? I'm just walking in, right?
There's no violence.
Yeah, exactly. And that's something that I've found myself since starting work at WWILD is I really had to work on that. My use of kind of those weird, sayings and abbreviations, and also, especially for me, slowing down how fast I speak. Something that I hadn't actually considered before doing this work. And now I think back and I wonder how quick I actually spoke before and if anyone could understand me. Other things that can be really important, especially, in the sector that we're working in, as a human services sector, and, either it could be the criminal justice sector, all of those sectors, we know that we all love abbreviations.
Yeah.
Don't we? Even, it's 2 social workers in the room, possibly 3. We all love abbreviations. And we all worked really hard to learn all the abbreviations, but I found that it's not actually helpful for people with an intellectual disability to be hearing those abbreviations, because they can be really hard to remember and really hard to explain, so it's best to just avoid.
And especially the words we never heard before.
Yeah.
Big long words.
Exactly. Yeah, things you haven't heard before, because that just makes it a bit more confusing, doesn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah. So with just another mention around those abbreviations, it can be best to just use the full term. I know when I started, I was using DBO a lot with my clients until one person said, yeah, that's okay. I've already got a DBO. And I was like, hold on a second. And then I checked with that client what DBO meant, and they actually weren't quite sure. They were just repeating the phrase that they'd heard from police and heard from lawyers, and they actually didn't know that it meant a domestic violence order or what a domestic violence order was. So that was kind of a big learning for me.
That's because we didn't know what domestic violence were. We thought it was all normal.
Yeah, and that's actually another good point around those kind of like vulnerabilities, hey? So
yeah, we thought it was normal getting hurt, so we got used to it.
Yeah. Yeah, that's a good point. We don't cover that too much in this webinar, but it is important to note that people with an intellectual disability experience significant higher rates of violence, domestic violence, family violence, and sexual violence than the general population, which is due to a lot of factors, but it is important to note that is significantly higher. Just coming back to communication tips, is that okay, Kristy?
Yep.
The one that is also really important is just be honest if you don't understand something. I think that's all of us all the time. It's really hard to understand everything, and just clarify with the person, especially as Kristy said before, a lot of people like to, tell their story in their own way and have lots of different words that they use, and just being honest if you don't understand and just clarifying with the person.
Or if they forget, you can tell them to give us a call and we'll go through it again.
Yeah. So maybe, like you said, Kristy, if someone doesn't find out every bit of information in the first meeting, to just kind of have a phone call later and clear up some things maybe.
Yes.
Yeah. And another thing around communication is, if there is any miscommunication, own the blame for it. That's been a big one for me. I think a few weeks ago, Kristy, we did some work together and I explained something probably really badly. It was a medical term and I'm definitely not a doctor. And I just said, Kristy, I'm really sorry, I've explained that badly. And then we went right back to the beginning, didn't we?
Yes.
Yeah. So I think taking the blame for any miscommunication.
Well, everyone even I do it sometimes.
Yeah.
Everyone does it.
I think it can be helpful to, acknowledge and let the person know that, you haven't communicated something very well.
Yeah, you made a mistake.
Yeah. Some other things that we've found that can be helpful is trying not to use sentences with more than 2 options or choices in them. This can be really hard, especially when talking about different service options or different support options. I do know that can be difficult, and this is something that I think I also struggle with. I have a client that I currently work with who I know if I give her more than 2 choices, she just shuts down. She just can't handle the having that much choice, because having choice was something that is only become something that she's been able to have really recently in like the last 1 or 2 years. So I have to work really, really hard just to kind of give her all of those options in a way that's accessible for her and isn't in 1 or 2 sentences. And I guess that really relates to using patience when working with a person. And like Kristy has kind of said, everyone's different. So it's really important to just kind of work slowly at that person's pace, if you can, and just being really patient. Hey.
Yes, because some people can take all information in and some people can't.
Yeah. So sometimes it might take people a little bit longer to take information in. Hey. Yeah. Whereas why being patient can be really that.
Or they forget because there's too much information.
Yeah. I think we've all had, times when we've been working with someone or we've maybe gone to a doctor, that happens to me a lot, where they just give you so much information, don't they? They just give you all of the information and you just don't know what to do with it.
You don't know what it's about.
Yeah, you don't know what it's about, or you forgot what they said at the beginning. So I think working really slowly and being patient and going at a person's own pace can be really helpful, especially when you're sharing a lot of information. Also, taking regular breaks can also be really helpful when you're sharing a lot of information or talking around a lot of, different topics. And just making sure that the person knows they can ask for breaks, because a lot of the time, we've done a lot of work with police, Abby, with people with intellectual disabilities. That's kind of one of our main roles at WWILD. A lot of people don't know that they can take breaks. And, sometimes services, such as the police, don't let people know that they can have a break. So they don't even know that it's one of their rights. So they might, struggle through a conversation that might go for an hour when, if they had their way and it was, more accessible to them, they might do 10 minutes, have a break, do 10 minutes, have a break. So just making sure a person knows that they can have a break if they need one, it can be really important. Hey, Kristy.
Yes.
Yeah. And going back to that, when talking about more than one topic, using signposts when changing topics, and also, like we mentioned, trying things differently. It could be, talking over Zoom instead of over the phone. It could be writing things down or using a video. So basically, just if one approach isn't really working, just try something different, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
Any way you can try.
Exactly. Because it's all about, supporting that person the best you can and making things accessible for them, right?
That's right.
Yeah. We probably already talked about this. We do like to go on, don't we, Kristy? Just a few things around those questioning, around using questions when speaking to people. We've kind of covered this already, haven't we, Kristy? Just, like we said, avoiding, more than 2 choices in a sentence can be really a question, or a sentence can be helpful. Possibly rephrasing a question, saying, how do you feel about coming in today and going in the taxi? versus like, how do you feel about coming in today, and then asking a separate question around a taxi, just kind of breaking it up, into more accessible chunks, hey?
Yes, because most people, when they go somewhere, they don't know where they're going.
Exactly, yeah. So just asking a few more questions instead of one long question, hey?
Or send them an address so they know where they're going.
Exactly, yeah. Or sometimes just avoiding a question if you can, hey? Yeah. Again, we have really covered these. We're doing really well today, aren't we?
Yes.
Yeah, I think we've really, if anyone has any questions around asking questions, we can probably cover these at the end. But we're really covering everything, aren't we?
Yes.
Doing great. I'll just pass it back on to Abby now.
Yes. So this part, we just want to address that the masking tendencies people with intellectual disability may experience. And this can look like compliance or agreeing with what you say all the time. Like Kristy mentioned before that, because there is a lot of stigma and bias in the society that people have received a lot of negative treatment, so that they don't want to show the vulnerability. So instead of saying no or I don't understand, and they would agree with people.
Yeah.
And also, like, if anything you want to add on?
No.
Yeah, no. And especially with people who, to be considered has position of authority in the room, they don't really want to contradict with that person, or they just go along with that person because they're worried about getting into the trouble, or that could be a learned pattern or accumulated experience in their life, so that they learned it's safe just to say yes. So there could be also, people with years and years practice and learn behavior that this is the only way I can get help, because I'm not being, problematic. I'm agreeing with everything. So this is something we might want to look out for, and double checking with people's understanding is very important. Hey, Kristy.
Yeah.
So how would all this represent to you, and how all this conversation could assist what does this represent to you with all the topics? Anyone wants to make?
But to me, it looks like scales.
Yes, that's the
To me.
Yeah, like how to balance when you work with people with disability. Yeah, just wait a second, see if anyone has any comment on this one.
So everyone, if you want to use the chat box just to send through any thoughts that you're having so far about everything that we've heard in terms of tips for working well with people with intellectual and learning disabilities, and how this will impact your practice. We can also come back to this as well.
Yeah, definitely.
Keep going.
Do that.
But please send through your thoughts. Oh, a really great one that's come through as well is the importance of listening, and equally listening as well, and the importance of really good training in this sector for working with people with intellectual disabilities.
Yeah, that's a really good point. I think listening is kind of number one. Hey, Kristy.
Yes, and it is mainly listening to us and believing us.
Yeah.
So if anyone's wondering why there's this picture up on the screen at the moment, like Kristy said, when you look at this, Kristy, what do you see?
A set of scales.
You see a set of scales, right? So I think the reason why we're looking at this is we want to really, look at the difference between concrete thinking and abstract thinking, which I probably should have put on this slide because it's a bit of assumed knowledge that I thought Abby would have, and then I realised that I hadn't explained myself very well. So I should have worked on that. So like Kristy said, looking at this, it's a scale, right? But other people might look at this and see equality, right? Or justice.
Or they see it different.
Or they might see it differently. Yeah.
Cool. Sorry. I'll keep on going with a bit more detail of abstract and concrete thinking. Yes, so like we mentioned before, in our daily life, we use we use abstract concepts all the time without realizing it. But many people with intellectual disability are concrete thinkers. So they process information more literally and based on here and now. So what's the difference between abstract and concrete is more about, abstract thinking is about anything that is not directly tied to a physical object or experience that you can have. For example, things you can touch, taste, smell, and see, those are very concrete things. But abstract thinking is a developed ability through our childhood, and sometimes we kind of, not realizing it. Like what Jackie mentioned before, the picture there. So I guess the metaphor and also like figures of speech, like we said before, jumping in a conversation, cross boundaries and stuff like that, can be hard for people with intellectual disability to grasp because it's very abstract. Also, time and money is very abstract concept, and we can see people may struggle with that one. So with emotions and feelings, when we talk about friendship and love, that could be very abstract concept, but doesn't mean people cannot understand it. It's more about people needs to have a lot of lived experience and some concrete examples to describe it so that they can grasp that concept very well. So for example, like love, you can give some concrete examples about, friends or family who in your life who can support you when you are in a difficult situation. Yeah. So that is love. Also, humor and jokes.
That's me 24/7.
You're very good at it, hey, Kristy.
Yeah.
But some people may struggle with humors and jokes because it contains a lot of what we call common sense. And everyone's common sense is different. Yeah. Generalizing, applying learning one thing to another is also very abstract concept. So that kind of relates to, for example, if you give someone an instruction or explaining things, and hopefully they could apply this knowledge to another situation in terms of problem solving, it can be quite difficult for people with intellectual disability. So I think what we want to talk about this concept is just for you to maybe reflect a little bit more about our daily life and our language and words we might use that are quite abstract. So there's a little activity. If you would like to put a little bit of chat and comments in, would be great. So what are some everyday phrases or concepts you use that would be hard for a concrete thinker?
We already got some examples.
Great example. Get a grip.
Mm-hmm.
What would you like to do today? A big one?
What do you think, Kristy? If someone asked you, what would you like to do today? Is that a hard question or an easy question, do you think?
This depends what they're talking about, what they're talking about.
So it sounds like it kind of be like a very vague, kind of really big question, right? Yeah.
Putting it in the too hard basket. What's up? How are you traveling?
What do you think of that one, Kristy? What if I said to you, how are you traveling?
I'm traveling great.
So that one would be okay for you.
Yeah.
I think I would have some clients who, when I asked them how were they traveling, I think they would think I'm traveling by train when I ask them that question. You would agree sometimes?
Yes.
Yeah. Great. Thank you, everyone. So now we're just going to have a look at accessibility. If anyone has anything that they want to pop in the chat box, that would be really great. Just thinking about some ways that your service is maybe already accessible for people with intellectual disability. or some things that you think maybe your service or your organisation could do to improve the accessibility.
Get a P worker.
That could be a thing, yeah.
All service get a P worker. That way you get to know them more.
Yeah, so having people, with lived experience of intellectual disability, that would be really fantastic, wouldn't it?
It would.
Yeah.
And I'm still working on that.
That is something you're working on.
And easy read resources.
Yes, I'm working on that one.
Yes.
I think we nearly finished that one. Easy read.
Mm. So Kristy is currently referring to a project that you're currently working on, aren't you?
Yeah.
Where we're working with some domestic and family violence services throughout Queensland, and we're looking at making those kind of intake, confidentiality, privacy documents easy read.
Yeah, easy read forms. Disabled people with disabilities, so they can fill it out easier for themselves, and they can read it themselves. Because half the time the forms are too hard and we don't get help. And they tell us to go find someone else to help us, and it's embarrassed.
That's a good point.
Videos about what to expect at court.
Yes, that is a good one.
Yeah, that is a great one, actually.
It is a great one.
That would be a great resource.
Face-to-face appointments and the amount of time that you have in an appointment.
Yes. I agree to them all.
Yeah, that's really fantastic. I think especially around that time point, we know that, all the workers, all the professionals, everyone's, very limited on time. But we found that just taking, any extra time, or maybe, having multiple sessions, instead of one session, can make something, meal service a lot more accessible for people. Yeah.
There's been quite a few comments as well about more training. So it's really great that you guys are here today and providing.
I love to do more training.
Yes. Yeah, that would be fantastic. We can definitely mention, we can move straight on to helpful resources actually. And one of the resources that I have not put in this slide, which
you think you're an expert.
I put that one in there. One resource is just with that point around extra training. WWILD last year did some training with Work Up Queensland around working with people with intellectual disability around domestic and family violence. So there is a bunch of amazing resources. There's videos, there's kind of like quick communication tips. So that could be a really helpful resource to access. You can definitely find it through our website, which is wild.org.au.
And you're more welcome to share the videos around too.
Yeah, thank you, Kristy. That's a good point, actually. And the other two resources that I've put on this slide, actually, Kristy was involved in both of these projects.
Yes.
So the first one I want to mention is a one that we created last year. It's 6 animated accessible videos around what is sexual assault and the different ways to report to police. That goes through all the different ways that people can access police reporting, and there's a video that focuses specifically on 93As, which is a recorded interview available to people under 18 and people over 18 with an intellectual or learning disability.
Yes, because we didn't know that 93A assisted because they never taught us.
Yeah.
And we never done it.
That's true. So that's why we thought making those resources were going to be really beneficial for the community, didn't we, Kristy?
Yeah.
Because a lot of people don't know that they have a right to that recorded interview, hey?
No, because they don't tell us.
Yeah. And then the other resources that we love to talk about is our And You Think You're the Expert project. Do you want to talk a little bit about that, Kristy?
It's more like heaps of videos and podcasts we did on it with all the ladies got disability. We call them, we're all the experts because we're actually using their voice and standing up for ourselves and getting their voices out there what we want.
Yeah. And Kristy, you mentioned the podcast. So on the podcast, there was 7 different episodes, weren't there?
Yes.
And then in each episode, the experts ask questions to a different professional in a different field or sector, right?
Yeah.
So there was people, from a domestic family violence service. There was a police officer.
Mental health.
There was mental health. and they're really, really fantastic. So if you want a lovely podcast to listen to on your commute home or to the office, we definitely recommend.
And there's also booklets. There's a book on there too.
Yes. And Kristy, do you want to mention what that project's currently working on and you're about to launch to everyone? The animated videos that are about to come out?
Oh yeah, the cartoon ones.
Yeah.
We're doing the cartoon ones. It's a cartoons, but it's actually got our voices in the cartoons. Because the reason we did it that way, set upon us out there, because protect us.
So not show faces, hey?
Yes.
Yeah. So there's a
and it's going out to the cinemas and anyone can welcome to sign up and put their names down and come to it.
So we do have more information on our website, but like Kristy said, it's some animated resources voiced by people with intellectual disabilities, combating those kind of everyday stereotypes and microaggressions that people with intellectual disabilities experience. So we're very excited to launch those, aren't we?
Yes. It's pretty much to say what we've been through and what happens to us and why we get treated and what we want.
Yeah, so people can understand.
Yeah.
Yeah. And question time.
Great. Thank you so much, everyone. So please pop in any questions that you have. We've had a few come through already, which is great to get us started while hopefully other people are typing in. So the first one is, what information does WWILD need when they're making a referral through to your phone line? What's helpful?
Oh, that's a really good question. Yeah. We usually, that's where we want to take the referral with the phone, because we can ask related information based on cases. So we usually will have some general information about the person and also the reason to make the referral. It will be really helpful if you can share some communication styles that person you're working with already have and you identified, and how we can best support, and also that person's support network. How does it look like, and where the support is missing, so that we can think of linking to the certain services. Yeah, but I think it's really case by case. What do you think, Jackie?
Yeah, I think sometimes people think that to access our service, a person might need a diagnosis, like a formal diagnosis of a disability. That's not the case. We accept referrals for anyone who identifies as having, an intellectual or learning disability. If they use different language to express that, then that's okay. And we work with people that are aged older than 12. And we also support women, men and non-binary people as well. So we can be really flexible, which is
and
really...
sometimes it takes longer to get in because she's fully booked out.
That can happen. It is important to note that Kristy's talking about counselling. So our counselling is is in high demand, but accessing our information, advice or case management services, there's not actually a wait list. So, yeah.
I'm just mindful of the time, so I'll just ask one more question if you're happy to answer another one. What tips do you have for supporting someone, or what are the next things to do when someone might be upset due to a poor explanation, such as immediately after court or speaking with police?
Yeah, that's a good one.
That's a tough question. As someone who's worked with police for a little while now, I think that does, happen quite frequently. And I know that I've definitely had lots of different feelings after conversations with police before.
I think it's more like just checking in with them and make sure they're okay before they go home talking to them.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point.
And then down the track, like when we do go home, just give us a phone call again and make sure we're okay. Just to check in.
Yeah. So like Kristy said, just let the person just feel those feelings. I think they're really important, especially after, information from court or from police, which can be
Or sometimes people want time to themselves after that, and this, like, if you tell them if you need to talk, just give me a call.
Yeah, and one thing I will add, like Kristy said, some people are going to be really upfront with being, I really need more time, but just important to note sometimes just saying, I'll check in with you tomorrow or the next day, can be really helpful in knowing that there's a supportive person there.
Yes.
Right. Great, thank you. There's been a few more questions coming in asking about referrals. Is the best place for information on that your website?
Yes. Yes, we do have information on the website, but also we're very open to have like a phone conversation and just a case discussion. And even if we're not the appropriate service, like Jackie said, we do work with people over 12 years above. But we can definitely give referral pathways and advice around which are the best service.
Yeah.
So definitely our website. There's an email there or a phone call. So we're really easy to get usually.
Great. All right. Thank you so much for your time and your expertise. And thank you everyone for your great questions and your engagement. Before you go, I just want to remind you that the feedback survey will pop up on your screen once the webinar is closed. Your feedback really helps us to continually improve our webinar program. The recording and the PowerPoints will be up on our website next week, and we hope to see you at our next CLCQ webinar.